welcome, and thank you for joining us. I'm anticipating an auspicious and a fun day, actually, to talk about two books that I think have a great deal of significance, particularly in the present moment. I would like to start by saying that this process began when Karen Maloney, the managing editor for, one of the managing editors at the Cambridge University Press, came and sat in my extremely cluttered office with me and proposed that we start a new book series with the Cambridge University Press. And after an extensive amount of discussion and thought, we settled upon the creation of what is now called the Cambridge Studies in Stratification Economics, with the subtitle Economics and Social Identity. And I think in the course of the day, you'll hear more about stratification economics as an emerging field in the general field of economics. It's a subversive emergence, but an emergence nonetheless. So we created this new series, and the very first book in the series is The Hidden Rules of Race, Barriers to an Inclusive Society, which was written by Andrea Flynn, Dorian Warren, Sue Holmberg, who are fellows at the Roosevelt Institute, and Felicia Wong, who is the director and CEO of the Roosevelt Institute. And you'll hear much more about this book during the course of the day. But at some point, Felicia approached us about the possibility of having an event to recognize the new book. And in the course of that conversation, we came up with the idea of pairing the discussion of this new book, The Hidden Rules of Race, with an outstanding book that was causing quite a stir at the moment when we started thinking about this, a book by Richard Reeves called Dream Hoarders, which examines the position of the upper middle class in America and, in effect, the ways in which the top 20% of American society, the top 20%, I believe, in terms of the income distribution, minimize opportunities for upward mobility for the bottom 80% of the population. And so we thought that it would be very interesting to bring these two books into conversation. And Richard generously agreed to come and join us for the day at the first end of the day. So we've structured the day so that we will have two morning panels that focus primarily on dream hoarders and a series of afternoon panels that are going to focus in depth on the hidden rules of race. Plus, we will actually have an opportunity for the authors of the Hidden Rules of Race to do a reading this evening, which will take place at the Rubenstein Library on Duke's main campus. So we welcome you to join us for the entire day. I'd like to also mention that there is a fantastic exhibit that is outside of the doors. It's called Uneven Ground. It's an exhibit on the history of housing disparity in Durham, North Carolina. And it was developed by several people who are here, Tia Hall, Melissa Norton, Robert Korstadt, who is the associate director at the Cook Center, one of the associate directors, Tim Stallman and Kimber Hines. And it is a superb analysis of the history of race and class and social inequality in Durham, focused primarily on the history of housing in the city. Okay? I'd also like to thank, I always have to thank Gwen Wright, our associate director at the, our director for strategic initiatives and collaborations at the Cook Center, who is always instrumental in making these events a success and has a tremendous creative impulse about how you put together and organize events of this character. I also like to thank Addison Malone, our program coordinator at the Cook Center, for the immense effort that she's put into this, as well as Rakeen Mabood from the Roosevelt Institute has kind of performed the paired or companion set of activities on behalf of the Roosevelt Institute to make this happen. So our first panel today will be a conversation between Gillian White, one of the senior editors at The Atlantic, and Richard Reeves about the Dream Hoarders. And it will be moderated by Nancy McLean, one of our faculty members in the history department here at Duke. And she is the author of a book that has some notoriety now called Democracy in Chains. And it's actually a very celebrated book because it's been nominated for the National Book Award. Her study focuses on the anti-majoritarian thrust of the Koch brothers' use of their money in our national political activity for the purposes of creating what I like to refer to as corporate anarchy. And her book is particularly interesting to me as an economist because she explores how the Koch brothers have attempted to turn a significant wing of the economics profession into hired guns for their purposes. But I also would like to say that there's a connection to the project that we're pursuing today in this exchange that we want to have about the two books. Because to the extent that we move away from the principles of majority sentiment dominating what happens in our political arena, it becomes less and less possible to change the conditions that Richard Reeves is describing in the Dream Hoarders. The most deprived among us become dependent upon the charitable impulses of the arbitrary sentiments of the upper 20% of the American population, or the individuals who we might refer to as the opportunity hoarders or dream hoarders. And to the extent that those sentiments are arbitrary, we have what I like to call the Scrooge problem. Okay. And so I'd like to share a passage with you from A Christmas Carol, of all things. Okay. And I think it's particularly relevant to the conversations we're going to have today. Okay. So there's a scene in A Christmas Carol where two gentlemen come up to Scrooge's office and they are requesting contributions on behalf of the poor. Okay. Here's how the scene unfolds. "Scrooge and Marley's, I believe," said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list. "Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley?" "Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years," Scrooge replied. "He died 7 years ago this very night." And of course, we're talking about Christmas Eve here, he says. "We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partners," said the gentleman, presenting his credentials. "It certainly was, for they had been two kindred spirits." At the ominous word liberality, Scrooge frowned and shook his head and handed the credentials back. "At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge," said the gentleman, taking up a pen, "it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute, who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir." "Are there no prisons?" said Scrooge. "Plenty of prisons," said the gentleman, laying down his pen again. "And the union workhouses," demanded Scrooge, "are they still in operation?" "They are still," returned the gentleman. "I wish I could say they were not." "The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigor then?" said Scrooge. "Both very busy, sir." "Oh, I was afraid from what you said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course," said Scrooge. "I'm very glad to hear it." "Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the multitude," returned the gentleman, "a few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall I put you down for?" "Nothing," Scrooge replied. "You wish to be anonymous?" "I wish to be left alone," said Scrooge. "Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make myself merry at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I have mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there. Many can't go there, and many would rather die." "If they would rather die," said Scrooge, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. So.